Welcome to Minerva Meets. I'm your host, Sonal Chandler, and this is episode 20. Today, we're going to be talking about a subject that I always talk about, which is AI. But instead of really focusing on the latest tools and the buzzwords, we're going to be exploring how business leaders can think more strategically about AI adoption, what it takes to lead your team through change, bring your teams along, and to really make these tools work for your business. We'll talk about mindset, decision making, and practical approaches that make AI less intimidating and more actionable. And I couldn't ask for a better guest to dive into this than Terry Keating. Terry brings decades of executive leadership experience and has helped countless companies navigate technology transitions, operational change, and growth. Terry, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for such a gracious and complimentary introduction.
Well, why don't you kick us off and give us a quick background about yourself? What's your story? How did you start working in this space?
Oh gosh, well, it's a long story. I'll try to keep it short. For just like technology, it's been a long evolution. I've spent 40 years in a variety of roles in financial services. 25 of those years were spent in banking.
Hmm.
And then I spent about 10 years doing consulting, investment banking, some turnarounds. And then most recently, over the last 10 years, I've led two different asset-based lending and factoring businesses.
Wow.
But a common thread through all of those, really going back to the 1990s, is that, I've always consistently been exploring how could technology be adopted to improve the business processes and intelligence by which we operate with. I mean, it literally began with the first IBM PCs.
Hmm.
And being asked the question, well, Terry, if I got you a PC, this is for my boss, what would you do with it? And I said, I don't know because I haven't had one to explore, right? So it
Right,
kind of started
right.
there. And then a number of years later, as I became one of the first executives traveling with a PC, this is in the 1990s, I became a
Mhm.
test subject for our IT group. When they would roll something out, they would give it to
Sure.
me. I was like the beta guy because I would tell them what worked and what didn't work.
Yeah, they
As a
loved you. Yeah.
Yeah, as a practical matter. Yeah, I mean they love me so much. I had the most high-end PC in the company, and I was on a flight one time, and our chairman happened to be in the same flight, saw that I had a PC that was like two generations better than his,
Oh,
and and apparently the IT guys got an earful the next day. But kind of a funny little story.
that's great.
Anyway, but yeah, so that's that, and then that led me to eventually chairing a technology users committee for this. It was a North American group of a global bank. And that was really my first really deep, intentional education on how to think about technology and activating it within an organization. Because our charge was to get our technology working better, kind of
Right.
broadly.
Right. That's amazing. Well, thank you for that. And, we're just going to dive right in.
Great.
And, when we were prepping, something that you brought up in our prep discussion that really kind of frames today's topic was, while AI is really dominating the headlines, it's not an entirely new concept, right? We've talked about how
Right.
AI has been
Yes.
around for a while. It's more about the latest step in a longer evolution of business tools, right?
Right.
Similar to spreadsheets, calculators, or even automation platforms in decades past. So, my question really is around why is it important for business leaders to understand AI in the context of prior technology shifts?
Yeah. So, because it is just an evolution, and in fact, you mentioned spreadsheets and things that are all kind of computer oriented, but I really go back further. We tend to speak about AI as something new, as you mentioned,
Hmm.
and in its current form of accessibility, in many ways, it does feel that way.
Right.
But this is sort of silicon based, silicon chip based, if you will. But in fact, humans from the beginning of time we have been discovering and inventing new ways to make our lives easier.
Hmm.
Fire the wheel. We went.
Right, right.
We used to be hunter gatherers, and then we started farming, and then we created mechanized industrialized farms, and then we were manufacturing goods kind of by hand, and then there were assembly lines, and now there's robots that do that. All of this has been an evolution. And then as we invented the computers, and when we think about computing, we think of it as a relatively new thing, but in fact, it started in the 1950s. And
Hmm.
AI was first concepted in 1950 by Alan Turing, and it's had a lot of evolutions since then, right? But it has been an evolution, since then. We now
Right.
carry around on our watch more computing power by a factor of 1 million
Right.
than the computers that guided the Apollo missions to the moon. So it's been part of our life and it's been part of our evolution. And I think that is an important context for us to remember this isn't some new alien life form that's taking over the world. It is a great tool in evolution to make our lives better and easier.
Yeah, and you know, I feel that that perspective definitely helps kind of when you put that context in place, it helps reduce some of that resistance or hesitation at the leadership level. Have you felt like that, in your experience that you've seen that as well?
Well, certainly for me personally, yes,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because that has characterized it. But for sure, when I have, when I speak to fellow executives, when I've been in front of groups, and recently I led a couple thought sessions of some fellow asset-based lending and factoring presidents and talked
Hmm.
about it in that context. And I could see there was almost a palpable relaxation in the room. People went,
Right.
"Oh, wow, yeah, okay, I get it."
Yeah.
And that doesn't erase some of the fear of it, but
Hmm.
it certainly took the temperature way down. And when we think of it in the context of just another change in the human condition, it, it just has a different perspective.
Absolutely. And I imagine that you've probably seen some examples where when you reframe AI, as this continuation of evolving technology rather than this like disrupting force that has probably helped teams and leaders engage more productively in the discussion rather than, oh no, it's not for us.
Yeah, so I generally try to frame it less about technology and
Mm,
more about change and business improvement.
yeah,
And this is one of the tools in that toolkit that we get to use in doing
yeah.
that, right? Because very, very few, leaders in organizations, and, whether you're at the very top or and leadership starts at the bottom as well. There's very
Hmm.
few people in an organization who would ever think, oh, no, we should never change ever, whatever we're doing,
Right,
right? We all
right.
think about, oh, we should change and improve and become more competitive and try some new things.
Hmm.
And it's about that change. And when we think about we want to change and we want to make the business better, people go, yeah, that makes sense. Okay,
Right.
here's a tool that helps us do that. Oh, okay. As opposed to technologies driving, it's really our desire to make our organizations better, more profitable, and more importantly, to make individual jobs
Yeah.
less drudgery, more
Right.
interesting, able to do it quicker, get my work done in 8 hours instead of 10 hours,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
That
Absolutely.
that's compelling to people.
Yeah, and what I think you're really talking about is a mindset shift, right? And I
Yes.
like how you talked about how what you just said about leadership, starts at the bottom, right?
Yeah.
And I think when we think about the mindset shift that you actually have to have when it comes to adopting new technology. It's more than just about the awareness of the technology. It takes a shift in mindset, not only from the leadership, but across the entire organization. So, what kind of mindset shift or, essentials do you have like for leaders to sort of adopt if they want to be successful in this AI adoption?
Well, I think first off, as leaders, one of the most important things is to model behavior rather than
Right.
dictate behavior, right?
Right.
That's pretty common, and so that means that as leaders, we need to not just embrace the concept, talk about the concept. We need to demonstrate that we're using the concept, right?
Yeah.
And so that can come in large and small in small ways.
Hmm.
As an example, I use a calendar scheduling resource. I know it's AI driven, right?
Yeah.
Um, I use a grammar resource.
Yep.
because I'm not the world's greatest speller,
Right. Right.
but everything that goes out of my office now is it's spelled correctly. Um, I have a AI tool that reads my inbox, my email inbox, classifies things between marketing and requiring a response, and even drafts potential replies for
Yeah.
me. All of those things speed my life up, right? I
Yes.
regularly use, whether it's ChatGPT, Perplexity, Copilot. I'm not endorsing any particular
Right.
tool, right? Um, but I use those throughout my day as, both helping me draft things, helping me do some basic research and so on. And I make that known to my teams that I use these tools. I
Right.
show them examples of how it's making my life easier and faster. And sometimes like, well, how did you do so much so quickly? Let me show you
Yeah.
the assistant I use. That's how I did it, right?
That's
And
amazing.
and so I think modeling that. The other, I think, critical thing is to look within your organization and see where there are allies.
Okay.
Invariably, there are people in the organization at all different levels who have embraced or will embrace, this evolution more than others.
Mm-hmm.
Find those people, empower them to
Yeah.
demonstrate to, not only to themselves, but to their peer group, the use of it. And
Yeah.
then it can spread from there.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
it's
I
a
love that you
top,
said that.
it's a top down and a bottom up at the
Yes.
same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a little bit of a trick, as a consultant walking into different organizations, you sort of look for those allies, right, that
Yeah.
are really
Yes.
passionate about what you're about to implement or do in the organization, and finding those champions and those allies really helps just speed things up a little bit.
Correct. 100%.
So, how do you kind of create that openness and so that the team doesn't have this pressure on them, right? Because, first of all, when you're showing them that you're using these tools, I feel like that also says, hey, it's okay to use these tools, because oftentimes people might be using it on their phones, or
Yeah.
they're
Right.
using it out of policy, if you will, right? So how do you kind of create this atmosphere, this culture, that it's not fear-based when it comes to adopting these new technologies?
Yeah. Okay. Well, you mentioned policy, and I think
Yeah.
that's an important foundation. It's an important guardrail. And by
Hmm.
having an appropriate use policy,
Yep.
right, that
Yep.
signals to the organization we are embracing these tools.
Hmm.
Not that it's okay. We are
Yeah.
embracing it. That's why we created this. Now, policies can be overly restrictive, or they can be overly liberal, right? And so you have to
Right.
find
Yeah.
the middle balance, and it depends on the kind of organization you are. If you're a
Hmm.
bank, it's going to be more restrictive because of the regulatory environment that you
Sure.
live in, right?
Right. Right.
Versus if you're a retailer, or pick another industry. So you have to be thoughtful and find the right guidance. And there's guidance out there. There's examples out there, but
Yep.
there's also professionals like yourself and Minerva
Hmm.
who can provide that guidance and help organizations, create those guardrails. I think that's the
Yeah.
number one thing or place to start. You know,
Yeah.
the other thing is simply, as we were talking a minute ago about, starting to demonstrate the use.
Yeah.
You use the term pressure. You don't want to have too much pressure, but there needs to be some,
Sure.
right?
Sure. Yeah, I
There,
completely
there
agree.
needs to be, from the leadership standpoint, hey, folks, we're going to embrace this, right? We're
Yeah.
going down this road. Now, if you push too hard, you push people into points of resistance, right?
Right. Right.
Versus you embrace it, you engage and you activate those allies, and it takes time and it's a balance. And in some of your business functions, in some of your business units, they'll move faster than others because of the
Yeah.
nature of the people, and that's okay.
Yes.
Let them, let these people be the ones that, go out and explore the cave, so to speak, and show the way for the others,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that way it becomes a community effort.
Absolutely. And what just came to mind for me as a topic for when I have you back on the show is, when you look at an organization with technology such as AI, you've got this we'll call it a newer generation kind of coming in, and they're the early adopters of these tools and this technology, and they're just so comfortable with social media. And then you've got, people who are in the organization who have been there for quite some time. And, how do you sort of bring them up to speed too, right? So I'd love for us to get into that conversation for another episode, but
Okay.
something for us to think about. But yeah, feel free to
Yeah,
comment.
no, but just one quick thing
Sure.
is that why while to a great extent you're right, there can
Yeah.
be some generational differences. It's not an
Yeah.
absolute. I
Right.
recently had the experience. I was working with an organization and a young man was brought in as an analyst and he's in his early 30s
Okay.
and he didn't know anything about the AI tools in ChatGPT
Wow.
or knew very
Really?
little and I
Oh,
was teaching him.
that's amazing.
And it was fast, and he was super open to it. But he's like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, how do you use this and how do you use that?" I mean, he was
Yeah.
immensely curious about it, and
Right.
it wasn't that he didn't engage in social media and wasn't technologically adept, but
Right. Right.
he had never started that journey. So the point
Wow.
being, don't hold that to be a universal truth.
That's
That
the,
just
I stand
because you're in your
corrected. Yeah.
30s or your 20s, that you're
Yes.
all in on these tools, you may not be.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. So, you talk about culture and creating, a little bit of pressure, but not too much. What do you see are things that work well in terms of empowering employees and creating a culture so that people are exploring and experimenting and learning to adopt technology like AI?
Um, Sharing,
Yeah.
right? Sharing,
Hmm.
letting letting others in the organization demonstrate some use of it.
Hmm.
We when I was still at Access earlier in the year, we had or last fall we had it was a technology session for a week, a hybrid team. So I brought everyone into New York. They were in for a
Hmm.
week, and one of the afternoons was spent on technology. And
Okay.
one of my teams in the business, it was the portfolio team, was particularly adept at really pushing forward on this.
Yeah.
And so for the rest of the organization, they spent an hour walking through, here's these different projects that we are doing. Here's how it is changing our business operations. Here's the
Hmm.
time we're saving, and here's the net benefit we're getting. And
Yeah.
the stress wasn't the benefit to the organization per se, because that can
Hmm.
be a little abstract. The stress was the benefit to the individuals doing the work, because
Right.
that's
Right.
very real.
Yeah.
And so people in different teams were sitting there going, oh, wow, they adopted that. And now they're able to do that task in an hour that used to take them 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
Holy crap, that's real, right?
Yeah.
So it's simple, it's little simple things like that, that
Yeah.
within this broader framework
Yeah.
that I found were the empowering ways to activate people and start to get people excited about it.
Yeah.
And then, sitting back and observing, well, here is this person who never embraced technology, and all of a sudden they're asking my IT guy all kinds of questions.
Yeah.
All
And
right, the magic's happening.
yeah, and I also think that if I was sort of a candidate looking at different organizations about, which one I was going to join, I think I'd be really excited if I joined an organization and they were talking about these new technologies and they're talking about AI and they're like, hey, we want you to use it. We want you to figure out even better ways to use it. Help all of us learn. Like that's the type of organization that I would be looking to want to join.
Right. Well, you use the term learning, right? You want to
Yeah.
join a learning organization, and this is
Yeah.
something that, it gets talked a lot about in management and individual and personal development, is be a lifelong learner.
Yes.
This
Yeah.
is really just a different chapter in that same book. I'm going to be a lifelong learner, but in this case, I'm going to learn about this. I'm going to learn about technology. I'm going to learn about how I can use this to empower my job, how I can use this to empower this process that makes our organization better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about adoption and successful adoption and what drives that. And we know that there's the triangle, right? There's the people, the process, the technology, but I actually changed the technology to pilots, right? Because you want to test and learn and fail fast and all of that good stuff.
Right.
So, You know, I guess one of my questions is around, you've worked with a lot of different technology teams and you've been the beta tester. Um, what have you found to be some of the most critical steps to getting adoption right? Because as a consultant, I walk in the door and sometimes I'm having to help with adoption a lot. So I'm
Yeah.
curious to hear what you have found that works.
Yeah. So when I was chairing that technology users committee, I happened on my own, I think, into a really powerful, what I think is a powerful framework. And that
Okay.
powerful framework was I would start with the users. And when we formed it, it was I didn't want executives on the team. I wanted the people actually,
Right.
on the ground
Right.
using it.
Hmm.
So, the people who use the technology, which was often the loan officers, the administrative assistants,
Hmm.
the people from loan operations. And then I wanted the people doing the coding. I didn't
Right.
want the I didn't want the supervising engineer, right? I wanted the people who were
Right.
actually doing the coding. And literally would get them in the room, and my framework was I said to the users, I said, I want you to describe what are the problems, what's the friction, what are the things that are hard, what's the things that are drudgery. don't
Hmm.
don't suggest what you think the solution is, because with all due respect, you don't know.
Right. Right.
You may have some well-formed ideas, but you really don't know. But I want so focus on describing what are the problems that you're facing, and
Yes.
and what's the inputs that we have, and what's the desired output, what's the future state. The engineers don't come to this meeting thinking that you know what our problems are, because with all due respect, you don't, which
Right.
isn't to say you're not smart, you haven't thought about them and you don't have, but listen to what this group is saying, right?
Hmm.
Absorb that and then take that back, knowing here's the inputs, here's the desired output, and design and build a solution,
Yeah.
right? Then bring it back. Let's test it with this group, right?
Hmm.
Just like we would test anything else. Test it in a safe environment. Don't turn it
Yeah.
on with no alternatives,
Right. Yes.
right?
Absolutely.
We've all heard about technology failures in
Oh my
that
goodness.
context, and I've been in the middle of one.
Yep.
Well, I was an innocent by party, um, but and then test them, and then roll it out
Mhm.
first to the people who are going to use and adopt it. Just as I was a beta guy, right? Because they knew
Yeah.
I would use it.
Yeah.
Find other people who you know are going to use it
Yes.
as you then roll it out. But it was that framework of starting with what are the problems,
Hmm.
users describe the problems, engineers design the solution.
Yeah. And I love that you brought that up because when I work with clients today and we go through a discovery and the first thing they always want to ask me is, "Oh, what tell me what the latest tools are. What should I use?" And I have to like
Yeah,
back up, time out, right? Like let's first talk about the what problems are we trying to solve? And then
yeah,
we'll try to figure out what tools fit for those problems, right? So
yeah.
I am very glad that you brought that up. So, you also mentioned, bringing in these different groups of people. Why is it so important to involve end users early in this time? Tell me a little bit about that, and not just make assumptions.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, first off, they have the most information on what are the problems, right? So that would be
Mhm.
one.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think a bigger thing is if they aren't involved, all they will then in the future likely to do, is tell you why it doesn't work.
Yeah.
They'll
Yes.
find every little flaw in it and say, "See, told you it wasn't going to work. Here's why it's not
Yeah.
going to work. You don't have to change." And so having them be part of the process and having agency in the process
Hmm.
means that they will be more productive in its adoption. And when a tool comes out and it's not quite right, right, it
Yeah.
won't be rejected.
Right.
It will be, you'll get constructive criticism about it. Like, well, this aspect of this doesn't work very
Hmm.
well for the following reason.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, now I can go back and I can do that. So it's providing that agency at the user level. I think that
Yeah.
is so important, because this was actually one of the frustrations that led to the formation of this task force, is that our
Yeah.
engineers were rolling out these solutions. Nobody was using them,
Right. Right.
right?
Yep. I've been
Because
there. Yep.
because because nobody had asked, does it really work?
Right.
And I was complaining to our chief operating officer about all these systems I was supposed to interact with and how cumbersome they were and why it was a pain in the butt. And that's when he said, well, we're going to form a task force and I need someone to chair it. And I was the only one in the room. So, um, but it literally comes, I think, from that,
Hmm.
that very human reaction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, let's kind of play devil's advocate for just a second. And what if it was
Okay.
more of a top-down approach, right? And, you know, are there any pitfalls that you've seen when organizations take that top-down approach and, without really engaging the users?
Yeah. Um, First and foremost, um, at the top, you don't really know what the problems
Yeah,
on the front line are, with
yeah.
all due respect, right? And I can say that as someone who operated on the front line, and I can say that as
Mhm.
someone who, as a leader,
Yeah,
I don't know what the daily problems are that the people doing cash
hmm.
applications in a finance company that may work for me, what their real problem is. I can conceptualize it,
Right.
but they can tell me what it is. And so the danger is solving a problem that doesn't exist,
Right.
or
Yes.
not solving the actual problem that exists. So I think that would be the number one thing, right?
Hmm.
But then, as I was alluding to a minute ago, when that happens, the person, who's you think you're solving the problem, they don't feel valued, they don't feel heard, they
Yeah.
realize they don't have agency in this, and now this is just a job that I'm going to do because I need the income and I need the benefits, as opposed to I'm really going to engage in this because I am being heard and seen, which is a
Yes.
basic human psychological desire that we all have.
Yeah, absolutely. I
And
couldn't
when you
agree more.
unlock that, it
Oh, yeah. It's like great things
really
happen,
amazing
right?
things happen.
Absolutely. And the creativity that sparks from that too, I think is amazing.
Yes.
It's wonderful. So let's talk a little bit about building trust with AI because and the reason I word it that way is because I get a lot of questions around or comments around fear of AI and oh, AI is going to take my job or how are my kids going to even find a job today? And
Yeah.
you know, as these tools are becoming part of our day-to-day operations, I believe there's still a need for human oversight, right? But
Right.
there's also, these tools aren't perfect, right? There's hallucinations, there's inaccurate information that's coming out. You've got to really know how to sort of work AI in order for you to get the benefit out of it. So, how do you think executives should approach that balance between leveraging AI and then also maintaining that human in the loop?
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack
Yeah.
there.
Yes. Yeah.
So let's start with that. First off is to understand that this is a tool. This is an assistant. This isn't
Right.
perfection.
Mhm.
And I think of it, for instance, when I'm using it as a research assistant, which I
Mhm.
do, and I can give you an example personally over the weekend. Um, the answers that you get back from any research assistant, whether it's AI or human,
Right.
isn't always right, isn't
Yep.
always correct, right? And so we need to have a system where we trust but verify. I know a very commonly
Mhm.
used phrase. Um, and then as part of that is it just good sense? Does it make sense?
Mhm.
So as an example, over the weekend, I have a piece of artwork it was my parents' piece of artwork. It's been in storage for years. So
Okay.
I'm like, oh, you know what? Why am I just storing and paying this? I'm going to see what it's worth and see if I could sell it. And so I took a bunch of pictures of it and I asked a particular AI tool. And what I got back just kind of didn't seem right. And so
Interesting.
I asked it to go back and check its facts, literally.
Uh-huh.
And it came back and said, you were correct. I was wrong, number
Mhm.
one. And
Mhm.
then, in addition to that, I went to a different AI tool and I asked it the same question.
Okay.
And when the two of them gave me an almost identical answer, I had a higher degree of confidence that I had found the right answer.
Oh, very
So I
cool.
was checking but verifying. Just as, you know, if I have a young analyst who's going to write a report for me, right? I'm going to
Hmm.
check and verify. I'm going to read that report. Does it make sense? You know, hey,
Sure.
listen, Sonal, I don't think you got your facts quite right. You know,
Right.
could you go back and
Right.
check this? So we have to remember we have to treat it with those same kinds of checks and balances as we would any other kind of
Hmm.
tool, right?
Yeah.
That we've ever used. Just like when we would do a Google search, and sometimes you're doing a Google search and you're like, oh, that doesn't quite seem right. So you ask the question a little different way. Oh, you get a different answer.
Hmm. Yeah.
This is just that done by a machine.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
that's one area where, sort of building that trust, it's having a system that the trust can rely on, just as we
Yeah.
do with everything. Because look, as a leader of my business, as leader of your business, whether it's large or small, you're not doing all the work of everybody. You're ultimately trusting the people in your organization. And
Yes.
how is it that you trust them?
Yeah.
This is very similar in that framework.
Oh, I love that. I love that you brought that up because I think that, you know, when you put that perspective in place and people are, it makes people sort of think twice about, oh, well, that's true, right?
Yeah,
Like, I'm trusting these people who I don't know to help me lead my organization.
correct.
This other tool here can help me do the
Yeah.
same.
We've all heard the story because it's been in the news, the lawyer who submitted a brief
I
to the
was just
court and
thinking about the
right.
same one. Yes.
And and it was flawed. And there were cites in there to laws that didn't exist.
Yes.
Well, I got news for you. That actually was just the person being lazy. And I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to insult the
Right.
person, but it's very easy to say, well, this law was cited. I'm going to go research. I'm going to go independently look. Is that the right law? I'm going to go read it. Does it actually exist? If they had gone
Right.
to even check, does that law exist? They wouldn't have submitted it. So they didn't put in place that check and balance,
Yes.
and I would imagine that, and I'm not an attorney, but I imagine most attorneys, if they got something from their junior associate or their paralegal
Hmm.
and they saw a cite of a law, they're probably going to go look at that law and go, oh,
Yeah.
yep, okay, I agree. That's the right site for this.
Yeah.
Or it's not. So here, I'm sending it back to you.
Yeah. In fact, oftentimes, well, not oftentimes, one of the big things that I help our clients put together first is, when you start developing this, need or desire to want to adopt AI, you also need governance,
Yes,
right? And so part of that governance is those checks and balances about not only how you're using the tool, but then the information and how are you validating that you're getting the right information back.
right.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about oversight. For an organization that's young, trying to just get started with AI adoption, what does good oversight look like? Is there such a thing?
Um, is there such a thing? Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a grave mistake if there isn't some level of
Yeah,
oversight, right?
yeah.
It has to be appropriate for the size of the organization. It has to be appropriate for what you're using it for.
Hmm.
If you're using it to help you draft marketing materials or blog posts, the level of oversight can be lower than if you're
Hmm.
using it to help you, you know, draft a proposal to a client, or you're using it to, do research on, on legal ramifications of certain things,
Right,
right?
right.
So,
Yeah.
so, what are you using the tools for?
Hmm.
And what is the downside of having something be wrong? Just
Yes,
as we would with anything else, right?
yes,
You know, and I've been in the lending business, so oversight on legal documents is much tighter and always
yes.
has been than oversight on what the marketing team's putting out. Do you want
Hmm.
oversight on both? Absolutely, but it's different. So I
Hmm.
think that's a starting point. The other is the world is replete with resources. It's
Hmm.
almost overwhelmingly replete with
Yes,
resources.
yes.
Um, but I try to spend few minutes every day, 20, 30 minutes at least a day, looking at something new, whether it's reading a new article about something,
Hmm.
or a blog post that may be from someone like yourself, experienced
Yeah.
professional like yourself, and just trying to absorb different pieces of information that all goes into the brain box and you try and correlate.
Yeah.
Um, I think, it can be that simple when you're a young, small organization.
Yeah.
Just start doing something, do it in lower risk areas and build your confidence in your skill in using the tool because it's a
Yeah.
skill in using a tool.
I completely agree. And I'll share a personal example that's just so not corporate at all, but I decided to use AI to help one of my daughters with a math. And, just started asking it to tutor uh, multiplication problems out to my daughter. And it was funny because at one point I was like looking at it and I'm like, wait a minute, that's not right.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's just an example of
Hmm.
at one point where it started just giving incorrect answers and I had to be like, oh, this is not right. And then I went back to correct it. But, even just on such a small personal example, like there are flaws and there you've got to kind of keep an eye on it, right? Just
Right.
to make sure. So, um, speaking of flaws, do you have an example on a corporate level where you've seen, AI have a flaw that you're just like, whoa, wait a minute.
Well, we talked about a couple things, right?
Yeah.
I shared one personal example. I mean, I think back over the last, year and in my closing time at Access,
Hmm.
there were numerous times where, I would ask or a question of it and get information back that kind of like your example just didn't seem right,
Yeah.
and so I would ask it again in a slightly different way, correlate the answers. I would ask a different
Hmm.
tool. Or, I might even just go out and do a Google search on my own, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
To
Yeah.
verify it. It's that simple. I mean, I don't I can't think of anything where it was like this really, really egregious, oh my gosh,
Yeah. Right. Right.
But there've been times where you get that kind of hallucination back where you ask it a question and it answers something completely different. And you're like, oh boy,
Right. Yeah.
you know, uh, did you have two martinis for lunch? Um, it's common sense.
Yeah, yeah. And
Common
I
sense.
do feel like the tools are getting better in terms of the hallucination. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I do feel like as we are getting better at prompting too, the information that we're getting back is getting better. So,
Right.
you know, um, okay, well, we're almost at the end here.
Okay.
And as we close, I want to kind of come back to something that you emphasized earlier, and that was that, every major technology shift has created
Right.
opportunities for growth and
Yeah.
evolution, not just disruption, right? So, for those leaders who are feeling hesitant or overwhelmed, what would you say to them is the most important next step? Is it mindset shift, or is it something else that they should
Hmm.
do to adopt AI?
Well, uh, first I would say nothing's like, flipping a switch. It's not just, oh, all of a sudden I made a decision and now, it's perfect.
Mhm.
It's a process. It's a learning process, just like
Yeah.
everything else that we do. And, we hear this, oh, AI is coming for my job, AI is coming for my company.
Right.
And I don't agree with that
Yeah.
premise. But here's what I do agree with. AI is not coming for my job. It's not coming for my company, but a person who is using AI to leverage their skill set and to leverage their time is coming from my job.
Yeah.
A company that is going to use this technology as they would use any other technology is going to come from my company. So it's not the underlying tool. It's people who and organizations that make use of those tools that are going to
Mhm.
outcompete us, as it always has been.
Yeah.
And to those who think, oh, these, vast numbers of jobs are going to be eliminated, and there are a lot of jobs that are going to be changed, and there's certain jobs that aren't going to exist anymore. But that too has always been true.
Yeah.
When we went from individual farms to mechanized farms, there was a lot less people needed on the farm. When we went from hand
Yeah.
assembly to assembly lines, you know, when we then went to robots doing assemblies. If you go in today's
Yeah.
auto factory,
Yeah.
it's all robots. The floors are clean. You can eat off the floors, right? It's a
Right.
very different
Yeah.
environment. But what we found through all of these changes is that while certain kinds of jobs, no longer exist, more jobs were
Yep.
created.
Yep.
In fact, if when you look over time, that despite all of this technology and all these advancements and all these different ways, we have more jobs today than we've ever had.
Right.
And we have more jobs today that are open than we have people to fill them.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't be afraid of job elimination. Now, there is job transformation,
Yes.
right? If you were doing
Yes.
this kind of work, you may not be doing that kind of work before, and you may have to adopt and learn some new skills.
Yes.
But there is going to be work for us to do. And we figure out how, we figure out how do we get that experience. That's the other thing I hear. Well,
Yeah.
if these tools are doing all these things that people used to, gain experience doing, how are they going to gain the experience? But I remember when I first came into banking, we were still spreading financial statements by hand on long ledger pieces of
Yeah.
paper. And when we started using computers, that was one of the big arguments. Oh my gosh, people are never going to have the same comfort with numbers, right?
Hmm.
And the same confidence in numbers. And I don't know exactly how it manifested, but people aren't using spreadsheets anymore. And we have people
Yeah.
who are just as adept at looking at and recognizing, good numbers or bad numbers as they
Yeah.
ever were. So we adapt as human beings, right? And that's another common thread. Humans are immensely
Yeah.
adaptable. It explains, how successful humans have been as a species. It's because of our
Yeah.
adaptability, and we
Exactly.
will continue to adapt even to these tools.
Absolutely. In fact, I mean, the AI is evolving how students learn in schools
Yes,
too, I mean, and it's just amazing to see how it's turned the classroom into this new exploratory place. And
right,
I mean, gosh, if I could go back to, I mean, going back to school now would be amazing, right? Not that I want
right,
to, but
right. Yeah,
all right. Well, such great insights. I really love everything you've had to say today. But before we really officially, wrap up here, I always like to ask my guests, if there's one takeaway that you want our listeners to walk away from this conversation, what would it be?
start.
Yes.
Just start
Yes.
somewhere. Or, a phrase that I like, eat the frog,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Yes.
Get up in the morning and go, yeah, you know what? This morning I'm gonna allocate 45 minutes to not thinking about this, but I'm gonna dive into a tool. I'm gonna open up one of these AI tools, be it, Perplexity, ChatGPT, Copilot. I'm gonna open it up and I'm just gonna ask it some questions. And it may be
Hmm.
simple questions like, where should I take my wife for dinner on Friday night?
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But that starts to give you the confidence in how to interact with this tool.
Hmm.
That would be my number one. Just start somewhere.
Right. Right. Yes. I love it. Thank you so much, Terry. I really
So it's
appreciate
a
it. It
real
was
pleasure. What a joy talking to you about
and
this.
I love just the fact that this was the perspective from an executive who's been through the change adoption, who's, been through technology transformations before. And I typically have guests on here who are, talking about the technology, but I loved
Right.
getting this perspective. So thank you so much
Glad to do it.
for being here, and I really appreciate it. And we're going to have you back for another episode where we could talk a little bit more about the culture within an organization. And I just wanted to remind people that if you are interested in getting in touch with Minerva Consulting, you can email us at let's talk at minervaconsultinginc.com, or you can go to our online home at www.minervaconsultinginc.com. And as usual, I'd like to ask our guests to take three next steps. Number one, subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode, leave a rating, and add a comment. Terry, thank you again, and we'll hope to have you back soon.
I'll look forward to it. Thank you, Sona. Have a great day, everyone.